Two men wearing black sleeveless tactical vests were hauling my mother's belongings out her house, while a third stood in the driveway, holding eviction papers like a badge of authority. My mother, still recovering from cancer surgery and barely able to stand without help, was crying on the front lawn, begging them to stop. My name is Ricky. I'm 39 years old, and I work in private equity, specializing in distressed debt acquisition and financial restructurings. For the past 15 years, I've made a living buying failing companies, toxic assets, and defaulted loans, then either turn them around or dismantling them for profit. Watching three scammers forcibly evict my sick mother while hiding behind fake HOA authority was about to become the most expensive decision of their lives. I got the call from my mother's neighbor in Raleigh while I was sitting in a conference room in New York. "Ricky, there are men taking your mom's things out of her house," she said. "They claim it's an HOA foreclosure. She's outside crying, and they won't stop." I ended the meeting without explanation and booked the first flight to Raleigh. But before I even left the airport, I started making calls. My attorney, my private investigator, my senior financial analyst. If these men were using a fake HOA to steal my mother's home, then they had financial weak points, and exploiting those was exactly what I did for a living. By the time my plane touched down in Raleigh 4 hours later, my team had already compiled a full background report. The men were identified as Marcus Reeves, Daniel Crawford, and Aaron Bishop. They were operating under the name Pinehurst Community Association, an entity that didn't exist in any county or state records. They had filed a fraudulent property claim against my mother's house for $38,000 in alleged unpaid HOA assessments. The filing itself was completely fake, but because it had been officially recorded, it gave them just enough surface-level legitimacy to show up with eviction paperwork and act like they owned the place. What my investigator uncovered next made things even clearer. All three men were financially drowning. Reeves had two mortgages totaling over $400,000, both more than 90 days delinquent. Crawford owed upwards of $200,000 in defaulted business loans. Bishop had 3 maxed-out credit cards and a car loan already in collections. These weren't powerful enforcers. They were financial wrecks pretending to have authority, while barely staying afloat themselves. I drove straight to my mother's neighborhood. She was staying with a neighbor, shaking, confused, and terrified. Her furniture and personal items were stacked across the front yard. The house itself was sealed shut with brand-new locks installed by the fake HOA. "Ricky, they said I owed money I didn't even know about," she told me through tears. "They said the HOA was foreclosing. They changed my locks. They took my house. I don't understand." I held her hand and told her the truth. "Mom, they're criminals running a scam. This house is yours. There is no real HOA. I'm going to fix this." Then I added quietly, "And I'm not just getting your house back. I'm making sure they never do this to anyone again." The next morning, my attorney filed an emergency injunction to stop the fraudulent foreclosure and restore my mother's access to her home. The judge reviewed the fake HOA filings and granted the injunction immediately, ordering the locks removed, and my mother returned her property within 24 hours. But that legal victory was only step one. While my attorney handled the courtroom, I turned my attention to what I knew best: financial pressure. My analyst delivered detailed breakdowns of each man's debt. Reeves's mortgages were held by a regional bank eager to unload non-performing loans. Crawford's business debt had been sold to a collections agency. Bishop's car loan was now owned by a debt buyer that specialized in repossessions. I began making purchases. I contacted the regional bank and offered to buy Reeves's defaulted mortgages at a discount. They accepted immediately. I paid 60 cents on the dollar and suddenly owned $400,000 in claims against Reeves's properties. I repeated the process with Crawford's loans and Bishop's car note. Within 3 days, I controlled over $700,000 in debt tied directly to the 3 men. Then I hired the most aggressive collections attorneys in North Carolina and gave them clear instructions: maximum legal enforcement, foreclosure proceedings against Reeves, judgments and asset seizures against Crawford, repossession, and wage garnishment against Bishop. None of them had any idea what was about to hit. They were still running their fake HOA scheme and targeting other homeowners, when the first foreclosure notices went out. Reeves somehow got my number and called me directly. "Mr. Ricky, I think there's been some confusion regarding your mother's property," he said. "We're willing to negotiate a settlement." I told him there was no confusion. "You filed fraudulent documents, evicted my mother while she was recovering from cancer surgery, and stole her home. I now own both of your mortgages. You're 90 days past due. You have 30 days to pay the full $400,000, or I foreclose." No negotiations. There was silence on the line. Then he said, "You can't do that. Those are my houses. I live in one of them." I replied, "You should consider that before evicting my sick mother. You used fake foreclosure to steal her home. I'm using real foreclosure to take yours. I'll see you in court." Crawford and Bishop received identical messages from my attorneys. In a matter of days, all three men found themselves staring down the exact kind of financial destruction they had tried to inflicting on others. Except this time, everything was fully legal and backed by real debt they legitimately owed. My investigator uncovered another critical detail. The three men had been funneling money from their fake HOA assessments directly into their personal bank accounts. Over $200,000 in fraudulent payments collected from victims across Raleigh. That money was no longer safe. My attorneys immediately filed motions against those accounts as part of the debt enforcement process, arguing that income generated through fraud should be seized to satisfy lawful debts. The judge agreed. All three accounts were frozen, and the funds were placed under court supervision pending final rulings. Reeves, Crawford, and Bishop tried to push back. They hired attorneys and claimed my debt purchases were retaliatory harassment. My legal team dismantled that argument with ease. The debts were real, the purchases were lawful, and enforcement was legal regardless of motive. Why I bought their debt didn't matter. Debt collection doesn't require moral justification, only legal standing. The courts agreed, and the foreclosure process continued without delay. Reeves lost both of his properties at auction. Because I controlled the debt, I was able to bid strategically and acquire both homes for a fraction of their value. Crawford's business assets were seized and liquidated to satisfy his defaulted loans. Bishop's vehicle was repossessed, and his wages were garnished at the maximum amount allowed by law. Within 6 months, all three men were financially ruined. Reeves was forced into a rental apartment, both houses gone. Crawford's business collapsed completely, leaving him scrambling for hourly work. Bishop took on multiple jobs just to keep up with garnishments and avoid further penalties. But I wasn't finished. My investigator had identified 11 additional homeowners who had paid money to the fake HOA under threats and intimidation. I contacted every one of them personally and offered to fully fund civil lawsuits against Reeves, Crawford, and Bishop for fraud, coercion, and emotional distress. My attorneys filed suit on behalf of all 11 victims. The cases were airtight. Fake HOA filings, fraudulent liens, extorted payments. Everything was documented and traceable. By that point, the defendants had no resources left to fight. Their finances were already drained through lawful debt enforcement. Default judgments were entered across the board, totaling more than $400,000. Those judgments became new collection tools layered on top of the existing ones. Additional garnishments, additional asset seizures. These men would be paying off court-ordered debts for decades, assuming they ever managed to do so at all. My mother's house was fully restored to her, with a clean, unquestionable title. I paid for upgraded security, new locks, and a comprehensive camera system covering every inch of the property. She would never be vulnerable to this kind of scam again. 8 months after the fake eviction, I took her to lunch at her favorite restaurant. Over coffee, I showed her the final accounting. "Mom, here's what happened to the men who evicted you," I said. "Reeves lost both houses and is effectively bankrupt. Crawford's business is gone, and he's working retail to cover garnishments. Bishop lost his car, his savings, and will be paying wage garnishments for at least 15 years. Every victim they scammed has been compensated from seized assets. None of them will ever financially recover." She studied the documents, then looked up at me. "Ricky, you did all of this because they evicted me?" "They evicted my sick mother from her home using fraud," I said. "They made you cry on your own lawn while you were recovering from surgery." "Yes, I did all of it." And I would do it again. She squeezed my hand. I raised you right. You raised me to protect family, I replied. I used every tool I had, money, expertise, legal power, to destroy the people who hurt you. That's what family does. Once word spread about what happened to Reeves, Crawford, and Bishop, the fake HOA operation collapsed entirely. Other scammers in the area heard that someone with private equity resources and a personal motive had financially annihilated 3 men for targeting his mother. The risk became too high. Similar scams across Raleigh quietly shut down within months. I still work in private equity in New York, but I keep close watch on my mother's situation. My investigator monitors her neighborhood. My attorneys remain on retainer. And everyone in the local financial community knows one thing very clearly. My mother is off limits. One of my partners laughed when he heard the story. You bought their debt and foreclosed on them out of revenge. That's the most private equity solution to a personal problem I've ever heard, he said. It worked, I replied. They used fake foreclosure to steal from my mother. I used real foreclosure to take everything they had. Poetic justice, financial addition. If you have financial resources or access to capital, understand this. Debt is a weapon. Scammers almost always have vulnerabilities, mortgages, loans, credit cards, business obligations. Those debts can often be purchased at a discount and enforced legally. You don't always need criminal prosecution to destroy someone financially. You need their debt, strong attorneys, and the will to pursue every legal option available. These scammers rely on victims being powerless. When they target someone with money, knowledge, and resolve, they learn just how devastating legal financial pressure can be. Protect your family with every resource you have. And if someone hurts them, make sure they regret it in ways they never thought possible. If you ever use financial tools to fight back against scammers or have advice on debt-based retaliation, share your experience in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about using money, power, and strategy to protect family and deliver justice when the system moves too slowly.